The army operation to free the Bataclan University in Pakistan has ended, with 21 people reported dead. Israel says they have thwarted a shooting attack organized by Hezbollah, which oversaw a militant cell in the northern West Bank. And Israel's Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked calls for the formation of an independent Kurdistan, urging enhanced cooperation between Israel and the Kurds. Well, good evening. You're watching I-24 News, here with the hour's top stories. We begin in Pakistan, where officials say the exchange of fire at the Bataclan University between the army and the Taliban militants has come to an end, with 21 people reported dead. Militants stormed the university in Charsada, about 140 kilometers from the capital, Islamabad. Around 50 people have been wounded, though authorities warn those figures could still rise. Tamara Ziv has the latest.
Gunfire and two large blasts were heard at the Bataclan University in Charsada, Pakistan on Wednesday, in a deadly armed assault claimed by the Pakistani Taliban. Police, soldiers and special forces launched a ground and air operation at the university in a bid to shut down the assault, as television images showed students fleeing the campus.
We heard firing from the back of the campus. We thought maybe some people were fighting. Then the firing increased. Then we said, get into the rooms, don't go out. Then the security forces came. They showed great bravery. The army soldiers also showed great bravery.
Police said the militants, using the cover of thick, wintry fog, scaled the walls of the university some 50 kilometers away from the city of Peshawar before entering buildings and opening fire on students and teachers. Deputy Inspector General Saeed Wazir said 70% of students have been rescued and that some students and staff were still stuck inside the university. He said all students have been evacuated from the hostels.
At this point in time, it's hard to come across an exact figure, but it seems to be upwards of 20 casualties at this point in time, with many more wounded. Security forces are saying that they have eliminated 4 terrorists. However, it's unclear exactly how many infiltrated the university, coming as they did under the cover of heavy fog. The operation, to the best of my knowledge, is still ongoing.
Pakistan, which has suffered from years of militant violence, has killed and arrested hundreds of suspected militants under a major crackdown launched after a massacre of 134 schoolchildren in December 2014 in the northwest. The 2014 school attack by 6 gunmen believed linked to the Pakistani Taliban hit a raw nerve in Pakistan and was seen as having hardened Pakistan's resolve to fight jihadist militants along its lawless border with Afghanistan.
And we move to Israel, where security forces say they have thwarted a Hezbollah-led shooting attack, which oversaw a terror cell in the Tulkarm area of the northern West Bank. This according to Israel's security agency, the Shin Bet. Mahmoud Zalul, the leader of the cell and resident of Tulkarm, was recruited online by Jawad Nasrallah, the son of the Hezbollah leader. According to the Shin Bet, Hezbollah directed the cell to carry out terror attacks using explosive belts and gather intelligence about the movements of Israeli security forces in the area.
So for the last several years, it tries to recruit either Israeli Arabs or Palestinians living in the West Bank and entice them to commit terror acts against Israeli soldiers and civilians. One of those in charge of this file was Samir Kuntar, who was killed by the Israelis several weeks ago. Another one, it turns out, is Jawad Nasrallah. He is not only the son of Hassan Nasrallah, but also the brother of Hadi Nasrallah, who was killed in combat with the Israeli forces in South Lebanon several years ago. Apparently, there were 2 modes of communications here. One was overt online, and the other one was a secret channel in which the 5 recruits were told to gather information about the movements of Israeli troops and about installations and prepare suicide bombings and fire on Israeli targets. The Shin Bet intercepted those communications and apparently is going to present the evidence in court.
Meanwhile, the Islamic State group released late last night 270 of more than 400 civilians abducted in the eastern Syrian city of Deir ez-Zor. This according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The monitoring group said women, children under 14 years old and the elderly were among those released. They were set free after undergoing questioning by IS militants to determine whether they had ties to the Assad regime. 130 civilians, mostly teenage and adult men, are still being held by the group. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is due to hold talks on Syria with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Zurich in the coming hours. Russia, a staunch ally of Assad, has launched a campaign of airstrikes against Islamic State militants and in support of Assad forces. Peace talks between Syria's government and opposition are set to begin on January 25th. However, UN diplomats say it looks increasingly likely that the talks will be delayed. Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei says attacks on their Saudi embassy in Tehran were destructive to Iran and to Islam. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister Adel al-Jubeir cautioned over the recent lifting of economic sanctions against Iran in a recent interview. He said the lifting of sanctions on Iran as a result of its nuclear deal with world powers will be a disastrous development if the Republic uses the extra money to fund controversial and villainous activities.
If an American decline were to happen or American withdrawal were to happen, the concern that everybody has is that it would leave a void. And whenever you have a void or a vacuum, evil forces flow into that vacuum, and we have a more unstable international system, which then leads to more warfare in order to rectify this instability. There are two things that we don't negotiate over in Saudi Arabia: our faith and our security. We will do whatever we need to do in order to protect our people and our nation.
And we move back to Israel, where Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked calls for the formation of an independent Kurdistan and urged an enhanced policy of cooperation between Israel and the Kurds. Although there are approximately 30 million Kurds in the Middle East, there has never been a modern, independent Kurdish state. Israel and Iraqi Kurdistan, the only semi-autonomous Kurdish region, don't have official diplomatic ties, though there are numerous claims that cooperation exists between the two governments, as well as between businesses and the militaries. And we're now joined from Erbil, Iraq, by political analyst Ari Mamche. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
A warm outreach from Israel today. What kind of reaction can we expect from Kurdish leadership?
Well, the Kurds and the Kurdish population have been expecting this kind of reaction from the Israeli leaders since a long time, and they have been looking forward to such kind of support since the very first day they have been fighting for their own rights.
Now, what is the nature of Kurdish-Israeli ties at the moment?
Well, I can call them they are not open and overtly relations, yet there are relations between the people in both sides of those countries.
Now, how do you think the warming of Israeli-Turkish relations will affect Israel's ties with the Kurds and today's outreach?
Well, that's a concern for the Kurds in Turkey, which have a different environment and circumstances than the Kurds in Iraq. However, the Kurds in Iraq have stronger and enjoy warmer relations since the 1960s and the 70s, when there was a revolutionary struggle in the Iraqi Kurdistan region, at that time led by Mullah Mustafa Barzani. They had those strong ties with the Israeli leaders and especially the leaders from the Mossad institution.
Ari Mamche, political analyst from Erbil, Iraq, thank you very much for joining us. Now, ahead of the opening of the annual World Economic Forum in the Swiss Alps, a string of militant attacks and rising risks to global economy have already overshadowed the event. Security was heightened in Davos, with heavy police patrolling the streets and concrete blocks placed in front of key venues. This as Asian share markets were in full retreat today as oil prices fall even further. And that's all the time we have. Join us again in just 20 minutes for more updates. Stay with us.